Well, the name of the show is What's It Like? And we do this every week. And hopefully, I ask intriguing questions after the first part, What's It Like? But never have I been able to ask any of my guests, what's it like to have a giraffe in your office?
Well, she's not actually in my office, but it is an amazing thing to say, you know, I'm having a kind of a rough morning. I'm going to go check out the giraffe.
Oh, do you know how many people right now are saying, I want to do that. Yeah. Where should I go? And who is that guy? It's Gray Stafford, Dr. Gray Stafford, your official title.
I'm the Director of Conservation and Communications for Wildlife World Zoo, Aquarium, and Safari Park.
Remember when it was just Wildlife World Zoo?
I do.
Then you added the Aquarium.
Yes.
And now there's the Safari Park.
Yes, and soon the entire West Valley.
All right, listen, you've been around just about every creature, I think, that God offers to us for our wonder. And I wonder if, as a guy who's with the zoo and who has been with SeaWorld and commercial attractions like that, whether you think animals are healthiest physically and psychologically at a zoo, in someone's home as a pet, or in the wild.
Well, if it's a wild animal living in human care in a zoo, and if the zoo takes care of it in terms of veterinary medicine, proper diets, proper housing, as well as my passion, which is behavioral enrichment, training the animals to participate in their own daily care, then yes, I think those animals do very well in those situations. Sure, certainly there may be some exceptions, one species here and there, because they're so specialized. But generally speaking, yes, animals are thriving in zoos. They're living longer. In fact, we're seeing some animals in zoos experience geriatric diseases that we don't see in the wild because they're living very long lifespans. And in fact, our knowledge in this area is so limited that we're actually turning to human medicine to help us treat and mitigate some of those ailments.
Like what?
Oh, like arthritis. I mean, you don't see an arthritic giraffe in the wild. The lions take care of that. But you can see that in a zoo and extend their life for several years, as well as their quality of life. That's the real important thing, is making sure, you know, just because an animal is older and maybe moves a little slower than it did in its prime, doesn't mean it's time for it to go, if we can help mitigate and make sure it's not suffering in any way.
So you not only have a giraffe in your office, it may be an arthritic giraffe.
Yes, we have. We've had some giraffe that our old male years ago lived a great lifespan, I think into his early 20s. And you could see he took a little time, and he really liked those warm summer mornings, and the winter mornings maybe he moved a little slower, but we were able to mitigate some of that arthritis because of what we learned from human medicine. It's a good problem to have, I think.
Well, and I have learned so much from you, radio interviews, television interviews, but I also learn from pet lovers who just simply love having a fuzzy, furry creature in the house. I have a neighbor who has fuzzy, furry creatures in her house and really hates the idea that you have all those creatures behind barriers at your zoo, not just your zoo, but all zoos.
Sure.
Can't stand zoos, can't stand circuses, wants all of those creatures to be left alone in their home environment.
Well, first of all, I would say I do think there's a distinction between a well-run and operated zoo and aquarium and a circus. I think those are very different entities. I'm not saying all circuses are bad, but I do think there's a big distinction between
Help us see the difference.
Well, zoos are fixed locations. You have the same staff working with the same animals in the same habitats. You can invest in your local community to help support that institution. Circuses are constantly moving and going to new locations, and that doesn't necessarily translate into great welfare for some of the animals in their care. It can, but it doesn't always. If that circus is using positive reinforcement to train and handle their animals, then I'd say they're in a step in the right direction. But what I also would say is we need zoos and aquariums today more than perhaps any other time in human history. There are 7 billion of us plus on the planet right now, consumers, human consumers. We want our iPods, we want our flat screen TVs, and all of those resources are at an expense to wildlife and wild places. So we need zoos as a reservoir to learn and understand nature, and also hopefully preserve and protect what's left of it before there are 9 billion human consumers by mid-century.
What species are you most worried about?
Wow, that's a tough one. You know, surprisingly, I'm worried about amphibians. We've lost somewhere like a third of all amphibian species on the planet. We've lost them to a fungus. And maybe it's due to climate change, maybe it's due to changing habitat and the way we use land and water.
Talk about a couple of the specifics.
Well, I don't have a species in mind, but the point is...
No, but frogs, for example, right?
Frogs and salamanders, things that I grew up
Yeah.
turning rocks over on rivers in Ohio, a lot of those species are at risk, even here in North America, because of pesticide use, land use, pollution in the water. And we don't quite understand the problem. The danger for us as humans is those species are a sentinel for what could be coming towards us in terms of the environmental toxins. So what we learn about wildlife and what they're experiencing eventually translates to us because we're at the top of the food chain.
This is Dr. Grace Stafford, and with that kind of an academic title, you have done an enormous amount of research in the animal world. And I wonder, with all of that, you ever been personally involved with an animal? Did you ever fall in love with an animal that comes to the Wildlife World Zoo?
Absolutely. A lot of zoo professionals, they say, well, we got to keep that arm's length. We've got to maintain our professionalism. But there are, I can't pick out a favorite species for you.
No, don't tell me a favorite. Just one story.
But I can pick out a favorite reptile or a favorite mammal. And one was a little guy named Sid. He was a wallaby. And I raised Sid. I would take Sid home with me. He would sit in my passenger seat, in a clothes hamper as a young Joey, eating little pieces of sweet potato. And I almost thought about going in the HOV lane because I had my occupant with me. But and I remember the looks that I would get from people sitting at the tunnel on the I-10 waiting to go home in bumper-to-bumper traffic. People reading there trying to get home, and they look over and they see there's a guy and he's got a wallaby in his front seat. So those were great experiences.
Is Sid still around?
No, unfortunately, Sid passed. But and that's a heartbreak, for pet owners and for zoo people.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times our critics think that we don't care about our animals. Well, we love our animals. That's why we do it. That's why we endure hot temperatures and cold temperatures and low wages, because we care about wildlife, each and every individual.
If any of the wallabies or any of the creatures at the Wildlife World Zoo and Aquarium and
Safari Park
happen to be watching right now, I think he handled it pretty well. God bless you, Sid. This is Pat McMahon.